source for sports news and analysis in Oregon and Washington. Live on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
What is up? Welcome to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show, brought to you by the Worldwide Sports Radio Network. I'm your host, Andy Patton. You can find me on Twitter at AndyPattonPNW, and you can find the Worldwide Sports Radio Network on Twitter as well at WWSRN_radio. All right, today is episode 5 of the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show, and I gotta tell you, it was not a good week for sports in the Oregon and Washington area. Not at all. Pac-12, Oregon, Oregon State, Washington, and Washington State all lost. 3 of those 4 teams were favored, and Washington State, the lone underdog, got pummeled by USC on some rare Sunday Pac-12 football action. Additionally, the Seahawks got spanked by the New York Giants. I know the score was 17-12, but against the Giants, against a league-leading offense, against Russell Wilson, that's getting spanked. The Zags were unable to suit up against Baylor and have now had their the next couple of weeks of games shut down because of positive COVID-19 tests. The Portland Trailblazers have shut down their practice facility for a deep clean after multiple positive tests as well. So it's just wasn't a good week. Our hopes are relying on the Seattle Sounders, who just 5 minutes or so before I started this show, they just kicked off against Minnesota for the Western Conference Finals of the MLS Cup. So that is what we were hanging our hat on for the Pacific Northwest. Otherwise, just a bummer of a last week. That's okay. The show must go on. And in this case, the show does go on, as I have another outstanding guest joining the show in about 35 minutes or so in Cameron Van Til. Cameron is a Gonzaga alumni and a former writer at the Everett Herald and the AP. He has his own site currently dedicated to the Seattle Seahawks, which you can read at CameronVanTilSports.com. Cameron and I, as you can expect, are going to discuss the Seahawks in the second segment, starting around 7:40 or so. We're going to talk about what happened in that New York Giants game, what's going on with Russell Wilson, the return of Josh Gordon, some various other things going on with that team. And then in the second segment for us, we're going to discuss the Zags. Obviously don't have as many games to talk about as we would have hoped because that Baylor game got canceled, but we're still going to talk about what we've seen from them in the first 3 games, what we've seen from Jalen Suggs, and kind of what we're hoping to see from this team when they come back into action. However, as those of you who are watching this stream may have gathered, I am opening the show talking about the one team in the Pacific Northwest that didn't disappoint us all this last week. That's right. In a shocking turn of events, the Seattle Mariners, least disappointing team in this area. I'm sure there are others. The Seattle Storm technically didn't disappoint anybody. The Seattle Kraken aren't playing hockey yet, so hard to call them a disappointment. But the Mariners haven't disappointed anybody yet. I'm sure there are some of you out there who have hoped that they would have made some more moves in this offseason by now, but that has been consistent all across the MLB. It has been a long time coming. There have been multiple years leading up to where there just hasn't been any movement in the offseason. It seems like you look at the NBA and the NFL, and players, free agents sign pretty much as soon as the deadline is lifted and they're able to sign. That's just never been the case in baseball. And now, coming off a season where there were not fans, they had about a third as many games. It's just a lot less likely that there's going to be a lot of movement. And the Mariners are clearly not the only team. In fact, what I want to talk about is some ways that they could potentially take advantage of this ridiculously slow market, of the non-tender market, so many available players that are not normally available for what we expect to be relatively affordable contracts. The Mariners are in an interesting situation where they're probably not really ready to go for it in 2021, but I think they have their close eye on 2022. I was listening to the Effectively Wild podcast earlier today, and Meg Rowley, who wrote at Lookout Landing and now is the managing editor at Fangraphs and is a diehard Mariners fan, she was discussing how most fans think that their rebuild is going to be over about a year earlier than it's actually going to be over. I feel that pretty strongly with Mariners fans who are really ready for this to be the year. It's not quite the year. It's hopefully a year away. I would like to think that they're going to push pretty strongly in 2022. I think they really hit their stride in 2023, particularly if Julio Rodriguez and Noelvi Marte are ready to go at that point. But that doesn't mean there aren't ways that they can make their 2021 roster better. And if expanded playoffs are still a thing, they could maybe gun for trying to get this streak over a little bit sooner than we might have expected. I don't know how feasible that is. It kind of depends what happens with other teams. But if you get a handful of teams that have been right on that fringe of contending who decide, well, you know what, we're just going to not re-sign some of our key guys and we're not going to make big pushes for free agents at key areas of need, maybe the Mariners can find ways to strike at certain positions that they could use some help and put themselves in a position to at least be competitive, maybe a 500, 525 win team. And that's, if there's 16 teams making the playoffs, that's probably enough. That might be enough for them to squeeze into a wild card spot. So Jerry Dipoto at the onset of the offseason said that he's going to address the bullpen. That was his biggest push, as he said, we're going to try to get 4 to 5 new relievers. So far, they haven't really done anything. But again, that's kind of the case for every team. They have made two minor league signings. One of them happened earlier today, so I was able to get that in the show, thankfully. The first one is Sam Travis, former kind of first base outfield type guy for the Boston Red Sox. Did not play last season, but played in 2019 and I believe a little bit in 2018. Played 111 major league games, 7 home runs, 3 steals, hit 230, 288 on base percentage. So nothing special. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that Jose Marmolejos type role that the Mariners had last year. Marmolejos was kind of forced into a little bit more playing time than the Mariners maybe hoped that he would play because they had some injuries and just the roster kind of lent itself to him playing a little bit more. So why not take a shot on another guy similar to that? Travis was kind of a hot prospect for the Red Sox for a while. They were really pretty excited about what he was capable of bringing. Obviously didn't really pan out, and that's why he's a free agent. But sometimes those guys take a little bit longer to pan out than you're hoping. And for the Mariners, they may think that they can find a little bit of gold here. And if he doesn't, and he's just like a average bench bat / kind of emergency starter, if you need him to be, that's fine. You're not paying a whole lot for a guy on a minor league contract, so you might as well take a shot on a guy like this. So I like this signing. It's not going to light the world on fire. It probably wasn't even on very many Mariners fans' radars, but these are the kind of signings that I think can really pay off in the end. And if they don't, it was never really that bad of a signing to begin with. It's not like it cost them anything tremendously. He won't take a roster spot from anybody dramatically better than him. That's not the way this team rolls. Jared Kelenich's not going to make the opening day roster anyway. It's not going to be because Sam Travis is better than him or because the coaching staff or anybody believes that Sam Travis is better than him. It's because they want to get Jared Kelenic more time in the minor leagues. Same with Rodriguez, same likely with Taylor Trammell. I just don't think those guys are going to be up to start the season. And a guy like Travis can kind of fill that spot a little bit, at least temporarily. The other signing for the Mariners was Robert Dugar. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that. Dugar, he was a former Mariner. The name may sound familiar to some of you who follow the Mariners minor leaguers or follow their drafts. He was initially drafted by the Mariners back in 2016. He was an 18th round pick, so not exactly a guy that they initially set sights on him being a big time contributor. He ended up being part of the trade for D. Strange Gordon and was shipped off to the Miami Marlins. He spent the last 2 seasons mostly in AAA, but he did play a little bit in the major leagues. And you can see why he was mostly in AAA, because his numbers were very bad. He had a 7.40 ERA in 45 big league innings. That is not good at all. 29 to 20 strikeout to walk ratio. So 29 strikeouts in 45 innings is terrible. Really, really bad. He made 11 appearances. 8 of them were starts. So you expect a little bit lower strikeout rate from a starter than a reliever, but you're still wanting something a lot better than that. And you don't want your strikeout numbers and your walk ratios to be anywhere close to each other. And 29 to 20 is definitely concerning. So not a signing that a lot of people are going to get excited about. In fact, a signing that I think a lot of people are going to be frustrated about, which is silly for a lot of reasons. One, is a minor league deal. You need depth. You need dudes to just bring into the fold that can compete for innings, that can be there in case you have injuries, that can fill out a rotation in AAA, to be perfectly frank. That's kind of what you want these guys for. So there's not any harm in bringing in a Robert Dugar. Beyond that, there is some interest here. His fastball velocity went from 90.3 miles per hour in 2019 to 92.1 miles per hour in 2020. That's a pretty big jump. That's nearly 2 miles per hour difference. When he's been, in the minor leagues for 5 seasons, and all of a sudden in 1 year in the major leagues, his fastball velocity jumps that much, that's notable. That is interesting. And then his fastball spin rate jumped a ton from 2,191 RPMs to 2,321 RPMs. The Mariners highly covet what we call spin rate monsters, guys who have a ton of spin on their fastballs, guys who have increased velocity. This is something that the Mariners have always gone after. And I think that this makes him a little bit interesting. I don't know how much the Mariners had a say in him potentially developing some of that stuff that makes him a good spin rate guy. Like, they may have helped develop that out of him initially, and then it wasn't working. And then they sent him to Miami because they didn't feel like it was working. And then they noticed, hey, it might have caught on. Like, he might have made that change. He might have made that adjustment and figured it out. And now he's interesting. Now we want him back. And he became available, and they said, yes, that's the guy that we want. A lot has been made about the Mariners, what they call gas camp, which is where they send their pitchers, either their drafted pitchers, their minor league free agent signings, any young pitchers that they have, they send them to quote unquote gas camp. And most of the time, these guys come out of there with a lot more velocity. They come out of there with a lot more spin rate on their fastballs. And it's whatever the Mariners development is doing. The Mariners at this point are considered one of the best in the league at developing young pitching. We've yet to see that come to fruition a ton at the major league level. We're getting there. Justice Sheffield had a very solid year last year that I think kind of flew under the radar. Justin Dunn had his ups and downs, more downs than ups, unfortunately, but I think he is somebody that I'm definitely intrigued with going forward. I think he may be more of a bullpen piece, but I think he's got the tools to be a good pitcher in the major leagues. Nick Margavich had a pretty good year as well, 24 years old. I think people forget how young he was when he was with the Mariners last year. So Lejay Newsome did some good stuff as well. So I think we're seeing some of the benefits of that. We'll see it a lot more once Logan Gilbert, once Emerson Hancock, once George Kirby, once Sam Carlson, once those guys are all in the big leagues, we'll start to get a better sense of how much this actual gas camp is working. But a guy like Dugar is a great candidate for this. We already saw an uptick in his fastball velocity while he was with the Marlins. We already saw an uptick in his spin rate. We know that he's got flaws. We know that he's not striking out major league hitters. We know that he's walking too many major league hitters. 7.40 ERA means that once they're getting on base, they're scoring way too much. Pretty obvious problem there. But I'm intrigued here. I'm intrigued by this signing. I don't think it's going to be, he's not going to be closing games or starting every fifth day necessarily this upcoming year. But I think that he could be a guy who's solid in middle relief or maybe a spot starter here and there and does a little bit better than people might have expected. All right. So the main thing that I wanted to talk about, I kind of touched on it already, but the league itself has just been cutting guys left and right. Every single team, it seems like, is willing to part with guys who are in arbitration, who have yet to hit full free agency, but who teams just view as too expensive, or in some cases, they're not even that expensive. They're just moving on from guys because they think they have other more cost-effective options. Teams are concerned about their budgets because of the lack of fans in the stands over the last year, which is kind of ridiculous. You don't buy a sports team for the investment. You're not buying it to try to make a profit. Sports teams don't make profits. Sure, they probably lost more money this last year than normal because there was no ticket revenue and all that stuff. But it's insane to see teams giving up on really quality players who are on affordable contracts. It's frankly upsetting. And I know that there are people out there who like to side with ownership and think it's cool when their owners can find ways to save money. But at the end of the day, they have the money and they're just choosing not to spend it on the talent that's actually like bringing them in the money. And that's just not fair. That's just like labor. It's against the principles of how we should be running this country. And it's upsetting to see it happen in Major League Baseball. I could talk about this for a lot longer. I won't. My main point is that I think the Mariners could take advantage in a lot of ways. The first way that has been brought up already just went all over Mariners Twitter, Seattle sports Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I'm about a week late on this because it kind of came out right before my last episode and I didn't have time to squeeze it in. But it's the conversation around Tampa Bay Rays left-hander Blake Snell. Snell has 3 years and $30 million left on his contract with the Rays. He is a potential trade candidate by Tampa Bay who is unwilling to pay him for the next couple of years. Allegedly, that's the story that we're hearing, is that they're looking at potentially trading him. Snell went to the University of Washington. He's a local guy, so there's certainly some appeal there. I'm not sure that I see this here. I don't see how this fits necessarily. I mentioned that the Mariners are probably more 2022, maybe 2023. That's the tail end of Snell's contract. I'm not saying he won't be very helpful to them in 2021 if they were to acquire him for that year, but they don't need him. It maybe takes them from being a team with a 48% win percentage to a 50 to being about 500. If you're still not making the playoffs, what's the point? And the most pressing issue is that you're giving up high level prospects. You can't get him by just, offering to take on his contract and giving away a few low-level prospects. If you could do that, hell yes. Hell yes. You do that right away because Blake Snell is amazing and he's very, very good. And it'd be so fun to see him back in Seattle pitching for the Mariners. But why would the Rays do that? They have 3 more years of him. They're not going to give him away for free. I think, frankly, the Rays are going to say, we want one of Jared Kelenic or Julio Rodriguez. And at that point, Jerry DiPoto should say, thank you. Okay, that's it. Goodbye. And that's it. End of conversation, because there's just no reason for the Mariners to give up these guys. I know some people say, well, they're just prospects or just minor leaguers. They haven't proven it yet, blah, 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 blah. I know Mariners fans are jaded about their prospects. I know they remember Dustin Ackley. They remember many of the other guys, Mike Zunino, Jeff Clement, et cetera, et cetera. Promise me that you'll listen when I tell you that Jared Kelenic and Julio Rodriguez are different. These guys are different. They are transcendent athletes. They are elite, future all-star caliber athletes. Really, really, really talented players. And to give up either of them for anything less than a current high-level all-star would be silly. And Snell's good. He's near that, but he's not that. He had one fantastic, incredible, excellent season. He's had a couple other very good seasons. You'd get him for 3 years. It's just not worth it. It doesn't fit their timeline. It doesn't make sense to give up either of those guys. I could see ways where a Snell trade could make some sense if the Rays were willing to do it, but I just don't think that they would be. I think if you were able to headline it around Taylor Trammell, and you'd probably have to include another borderline top 100 guy, which in my mind is probably George Kirby. So Taylor Trammell, George Kirby, and then probably even then another pretty good third piece. I can't think of anybody specifically off the top of my head, but another top 10 prospect in the Mariners system, or top 12 prospect in the Mariners system, maybe like a Joe Rizzo or an Austin Shenton or something like that. That's what you have to give up for Blake Snell. For 3 years of Blake Snell, when one of those years you're very likely not going to be contending. And then the second year, maybe you are. And then the third year, yeah, you probably are, but that's the last year of Snell's contract. This doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me. And this is as somebody who loves Blake Snell, who likes what he does. I love his blueprint. He goes fastballs up, breaking stuff down. It's filthy. It's exceptionally effective. The Rays seem to be really, really hesitant to let him go 3 times through the order, which I'm sure is frustrating for him, which I'm sure is part of the reason that these conversations are coming up. That, and of course, the fact that he was pulled in that same situation in Game 6 of the World Series in exchange for Nick Anderson, who gave up a home run to Mookie Betts and kind of blew the series for the Rays. I understand why this team is potentially looking at trading him, but I don't think they're going to ask for anything under his actual value. And for the Mariners, that's just not worth giving up what they would need to give up in order to get him. So I promised you that I would talk about players that the Mariners should target, and thus far I haven't really done that. So I promise we're getting there. I want to talk about a couple of outfield options that I think really fit what the Mariners could use for next year. So we have Kyle Lewis, who's going to play in the outfield next year. We have Mitch Haniger, who, assuming he's healthy, is going to play in the outfield next year. Then you have Jared Kelenic, Julio Rodriguez, who I don't think are going to play in the outfield. They won't play in the outfield to start the year. Rodriguez won't at all. I don't think he's ready in 2021. Kelenic maybe later in the year, but you're not going into the season with him as your starter. So then you have Trammell, who I don't think is ready. Other options are like Phillip Ervin, Tim Lopes, Sam Haggerty, Dylan Moore, who was very good last year, but could also play second base or third base or shortstop. He can play virtually anywhere. I think they probably really like him in that kind of super utility role. You have Jake Fraley, who just hasn't been good yet. Braden Bishop, who is a great person, but hasn't been good yet. And I don't think that that's what they want to do. So for the Mariners, you look at all these options of guys who were recently released who could potentially sign for 1-year deals. Maybe not all of them will. Some of these guys are very young and may look to get multi-year contracts now that they hit free agency a little sooner than they may have expected after getting non-tendered. But if they can get these guys on 1-year deals, have them kind of be the stopgap left fielder for a year, and then, or even 3/4 of a year before Kelenic comes up, and then they can let them hit free agency again after the year when the Mariners are ready to go into 2022 with Kelenic in a starting role. So these are 4 guys that I kind of identified that I think I'm surprised are free agents. All of them are under 30 years old that I think would fit really well. The first one is Kyle Schwarber. Schwarber is former Cubs player. He's been with the Chicago organization for 10 years, won a World Series with them in 2016. 27-year-old guy, was expected to cost about $8 million in arbitration, and the Cubs said, nope, we're not willing to pay you that, so bye-bye. So now Schwarber is a free agent. I'll say this for all these moves, I'm surprised to see these guys on the open market. With Schwarber, the NL did finally make the decision that they are going to go back to not having a designated hitter in 2021, which is kind of baffling for lots of reasons, but I won't get into that right now. I think that the DH will eventually rejoin the NL probably as soon as 2022, when there's a new labor negotiation between the Players Association and the MLB. But for 2021, there's not a DH in the National League. Kyle Schwarber is not a great fielder. So maybe the Cubs just said, you know what, this experiment is over for us. We're done. But Schwarber has been an above average hitter for his entire major league career. He has played 551 games. He has a 113 WRC plus. Just for reference, 100 WRC plus is exactly average. So that means he is 13 percentage points above average. He's at 121 home runs in that time. He's only hit 230, but he's got a 330 on base percentage. He was good last year. He had 11 home runs in 59 games. That's about a 32 home run pace, which is very good. He also hit 188. So you kind of saw the good and the bad that you get with a Kyle Schwarber type guy. I'm okay with it. I think 27 years old, he's a little bit Dan Vogelbach-esque, and I think he's more likely to return the 30 home run first half all-star Dan Vogelbach than the second half couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, also didn't have any power Dan Vogelbach. His career has been a mixture of both. Obviously, most guys who are that volatile, definitely you kind of see a little bit of both. But I think the Mariners giving him a shot to be the left fielder, and probably a lot of the DH, they'd probably find another spot for Ty France. Maybe he'd play second base, maybe Moore would play left field, and maybe Shedlong would go to the bench. I'm great with this. I think this would be an amazing signing for the Mariners. I would really love to see them go after Schwarber. Next up is David Dahl. Dahl is 26, a little bit younger. He only was expected to cost the Rockies $2.6 million, and they cut him anyway. They have a lot of young outfielders. I understand that. And Dahl was really bad in 2020, but it was 24 games. That's nothing. People, the best hitters on the planet, have had bad 24-game stretches. I can't imagine that they looked at that too strongly when evaluating him for this season. So that's just upsetting that he was cut. He was outstanding in 2018 and 2019. Between those 2 seasons, he played 177 games, which is slightly more than a regular season. He hit 31 home runs with a 110 WRC plus. So we're talking about a guy who was slightly above average with the stick, who had 30 home run power in about 162 game season. So not that dissimilar from Kyle Schwarber, except that he's a better fielder. He's not an elite fielder, but he's a lot better than Kyle Schwarber. Also, Dahl has played left, center, and right. So if Kyle Lewis maybe doesn't do as well defensively in center field this year and they want to try him out in left, they can. If Mitch Haniger's maybe mobility isn't what it used to be and they want to either have him DH or play left, which is a little bit easier, they could play Dahl in right. They have a lot of flexibility with him. I think this would be a fantastic signing. If the Rockies weren't willing to pay him $2.5 million and no team claimed him, actually, excuse me, he was non-tendered, so I don't think they could have. But either way, if nobody's willing to pay him $2.5 million, the Mariners should absolutely pay him $2.5 million. That would be a fantastic deal if they could get him on a 1-year deal. And that's the kicker. Dahl may be like, you know what? I don't know what the free agent market's going to look like next year after the labor negotiations. I don't know. He may just decide, I want to try to get a 3 or 4 year deal right now so that I can have some security. I can move my family somewhere and know that we're going to be there for a long time. And I totally get that 100%. The Mariners probably shouldn't give him more than a 2-year deal. If he says, I want 3 or 4 or 5 years, they should say thank you, but no thank you, because it just doesn't make sense to bring somebody in when you have the guys that you have coming up. But if they can get him on a 2-year or a 1-year, excellent, outstanding. Worst case scenario is that struggles that we saw last year are partly real, and he becomes a below average hitting outfielder and still a decent defensive guy who can play all 3 positions. That's fine. basically just a better Jake Fraley is probably the worst case scenario for David Dahl. If you can get that for under $2.5 million, you should, because the upside is really good. The upside is, 25 home runs, playing left field, hitting 260. The upside is a 3.5, maybe not 3.5, 2.5 WAR player. That's great. You absolutely will take that for what his value is going to be. Next up is probably the most known outfielder they got non-tendered, and Eddie Rosario. Rosario played for the Minnesota Twins for his entire career. He's been in that system for a super long time, 29 years old, was expected to get paid around $10 million. So maybe you can understand why a smaller market team like Minnesota would give up on him. But also Minnesota is contending like one of the best teams in the American League. They're the potential favorites to win the American League Central next year, although the White Sox are right on their heels. And they give up on their starting left fielder. Yes, they have some younger guys, Alex Krivillov, Trevor Larnach, Brett Rooker, all guys who I think could potentially play left field for the Twins next year. Maybe they felt that makes Rosario expendable. But this dude is good. He hit 13 home runs in 57 games last year. That's a 32 home run pace. He hit 32 home runs exactly in 2019. He hit 27 the year before that and 24 the year before that. This dude has pop. He is a legitimate 30 home run threat year in and year out. He also hits like 270, 280. He's dropped down to 257 last year, but again, it was a pretty wonky year. He only played 57 games. I love this one. He would be more expensive. If I'm Eddie Rosario, I'm doing my absolute best to get a 4-year deal minimum if I can. He may just not be able to get that because I think that the market is just really, really suppressed this year. I think all teams, I don't want to use the word collusion, but all teams are pretty well set, and we're not going to go out and spend a whole bunch of money because we didn't have fans last year and we don't want to make other teams feel bad about not spending money kind of deal. So, but Rosario would be the best of these options. He'd be the most expensive, but if the Mariners could get him on a 1 or 2 year deal, absolutely. He's a clear-cut left fielder. That's about the only position he plays, but he would be such a great stopgap alongside Haniger and Kyle Lewis. All of a sudden, the Mariners have a pretty darn good outfield. And for the Mariners to have a very good outfield without Jared Kelenic, Julio Rodriguez, or Taylor Trammell in it is excellent. That's really fun. They still have some holes on their roster, obviously, outside of that, but this would be super fun. I would really love the Mariners to sign Eddie Rosario. Every team in baseball, every fan base wants their team to sign Eddie Rosario, except for the few teams that have super full outfields. And even some of them still want to sign him anyway. So it's not like the Mariners will be the only team contending for his services if they even are pursuing him at all. But this is a really nice fit and somebody that I would love to see in the Mariner uniform next year. Last outfielder, then I'm going to talk a few relievers real quick before we go to a break and bring Cameron on. The next outfielder is Albert Almora, also on the Chicago Cubs. So they not only cut Kyle Schwarber, they cut Almora as well. They didn't cut Chris Bryant, which a lot of people expected them to do. Thankfully, there's a little bit of sanity prevailing, and they're going to hold on to one of their franchise icons. But Almora only was going to cost about $1.6 million. So he was going to be hyper cheap. Now, he's not as good as the other guys. I'll admit that. He's a little bit... he would be a step down from those three guys if the Mariners chose to go this route. But he was the 6th overall pick in 2012, so he's got a lot of pedigree, really highly respected prospect coming up through the system. But hasn't really hit all that much. He's a 271 career hitter in 489 games, which isn't terrible, but he's only got a 309 on base percentage, 28 home runs in 490 games, 85 WRC plus. So pretty healthily below average with the stick. But he's a good defensive outfielder. He's played mostly center field. I think that's something that the Mariners should take into account when they're looking at some of these signings that they could potentially make for this year. I know Kyle Lewis was super fun in center field. I know he made some catches that were reminiscent of Griffey or even Mike Cameron, but there's not a lot of evidence that Kyle Lewis is a good defensive center fielder or that he will be a good defensive center fielder. I think the safest bet for Lewis is probably a move to the corners, either left or right. And maybe not right away. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he develops into a very good defensive center fielder. That'd be awesome. Awesome for the Mariners. But with Kelenic and with Julio, more so Kelenic, who I think will end up being a center fielder, Lewis is probably going to move anyway. And it might make sense for the Mariners to go after an Almora type guy right now and have him be that option. He may not start. He may be more of a 4th outfielder type, a guy who starts occasionally and bumps Lewis over to left field just as a way to get him more experience playing left, to give other guys breaks, things like that. I would like this. I think Almora would be kind of fun. He's flashed some home run and stolen base potential in his career. We've seen some seasons where he did really well at both. Again, I think he's probably just an upgrade to the fourth outfitter spot, as opposed to being like a high level starter, which is what you'd get out of Rosario or Dahl, or even potentially Schwarber as well. But yeah, I think that this would be a fun option for the Mariners as well. And they have so many. Those are 4. There's a lot more that I could have named. We're already running long on this segment, but there are so many guys that I could have discussed that the Mariners could potentially try to bring in on a 1-year deal or even a 2-year deal where they could look to trade them during the 2022 trade deadline. I think all of that makes some sense for them to potentially pursue. Next thing I wanted to talk about was relievers. We'll kind of breeze through them a little bit quicker so that we don't keep Cameron waiting for too long. But there are 4 relievers that I was thinking would make some sense for the Mariners to pursue. Jerry Dipoto said he wanted to bring in 4 new relievers. I don't think that he will bring in all 4 of these guys because they're all veterans. They're all guys who are going to command at least somewhat notable contracts. They're not going to be tens of millions of dollars or anything, but I think he's probably thinking more like 1 or 2 of these guys and then some much less expensive guys or guys who are even on minor league contracts. But first one is Cam Bedrosian. Mariners fans will probably be somewhat familiar with him. Bedrosian has played for the Angels for the last 6 years, I think. He's been with them for a super long time. The Angels tried to send him to the minor leagues after the year, and he refused the minor league assignment, which I do not blame him. And then he was subsequently released. So he is a free agent. The reason I don't blame him is because he was really good last year. Again, the same caveat applies for all the players, but he only threw 14.2 innings last year because it was a super shortened season, but he had a 2.45 ERA in those 14 innings. And then in 2019, he had a 3.23 ERA in 61 innings. So his last 80 innings or so have been really, really good. And he's had 3 straight years with an ERA below 380, which basically all of the Mariners relievers were above that. He would borderline, I think there's little debate he'd come in and be the best reliever on the Mariners this upcoming season. And for the Angels to try to send him to the minor leagues, it's kind of baffling and no surprise that he decided, nope, I'd rather try to sign somewhere else. So Bedrosian's got a career 3.70 ERA, a 24.5% strikeout rate. Really good stuff. Just a guy that's aesthetically pleasing to watch pitch. I think he'd be the Mariners closer in 2020 if they brought him in. I think they'd stick him right in that role. Andres Munoz is a guy I'm really excited to see, but he was a part of the trade with the Padres for Taylor Trammell when they sent Austin Nola away. I think Munoz is going to be really exceptional, Edwin Diaz-esque in a way, but he's still expected to be hurt for most of 2021. They traded for him while he was recovering from Tommy John surgery. So while he's still not an option, Bedrosian would be a great kind of stopgap signing for 1 year to just be the closer for the team and kind of lock things down in what's a really volatile situation for the M's right now. Next couple of guys are all lefties because I love left-handed pitchers. First up is Justin Wilson, veteran guy, 33 years old. He's thrown 429 major league innings, yet he has a 3.27 ERA. Really, really good. He's been good his entire career, 26% strikeout rate. For his career, 28% strikeout rate and a 3.16 FIP against left-handers, which is exceptional. So a guy that I think makes a ton of sense. The Mariners were really dearth of left-handed bullpen use last year. It was just not a strength of theirs at all. And they're going to need it this year. You need quality lefties. I know that the rule change has made it a little bit less. The loogie has gone out of vogue a bit because pitchers are forced to come in and face at least 3 batters. The 3-batter minimum makes it harder to have a loogie stands for left-handed 1-out guy. And you can't have a 1-out guy when you have to face at least 3 batters. So I think we'll see loogies used a little bit less, but a guy like Wilson, he's had success against right-handers as well. And I think would be a great guy to be able to bring in and have him face a high-level lefty and then still trust that he'll do okay against if he has to face a pair of right-handers afterwards. He's got some walk issues, which is fine. I think it's manageable. Everybody in the Mariners' current bullpen has some walk issues, so it's not exactly a huge problem for them. Jake Mcgee is next, 34 years old, was exceptional last year. So good in 20 innings for the Dodgers. He had a 2.66 ERA, 33 strikeouts, and just 3 walks in 20 innings. Also, raise your hand out there if you knew that Jake Mcgee was on the Dodgers last year. Anybody raising their hand, liars. Nobody knew that Jake Mcgee was on the Dodgers. He'd been on the Rockies for the few years before that. His seasons before that were not very good, but he was on the Rockies, and it's really, really hard to pitch in Colorado. So I tend to give him a little bit of a break because of that. Mcgee also has pretty much equal numbers against both lefties and righties, which is good. That's a good, like I said with the Justin Wilson talk, that's good because that means that they can actually utilize him in late inning roles. Like he could be the guy who throws the 8th inning or the 7th inning or comes in sticky situations because you can trust him against lefties and righties. Obviously, he comes baked with some risk. He's had some injury stuff in the past. And like I said, his 20 innings last year were very good, but does that just mean you ignore the 3 bad years before that? Not necessarily. So they need to get him on a pretty affordable deal. But if they're able to do that, which I don't think that there's a lot of teams knocking down the door to sign Jake Mcgee, I think this is a guy that makes a lot of sense for them. Last, but very much not least, is Brad Hand. Brad Hand was probably the first domino to fall in what kind of set the tone for what people expected to be a very not player-friendly offseason in the MLB. Brad Hand was not only non-tendered by the Cleveland Indians, who would have had to pay him about $10 million next year. He was waived the day before his option, which meant that the Indians were unwilling to even pay him the $1 million buyout. The Indians said, we don't want to pay you anything. We're just going to waive you. And then no team signed him. He just cleared waivers on $10 million. Closers like this, guys with his pedigree and his level of success, have commanded well more than $10 million in years past per year. And for him to not get that from any team is a really strong indication of what this offseason is going to look like. He's been outstanding since 2016. Brad Hand has 2.70 ERA, 33% strikeout rate, 107 WHIP, 104 saves. Outstanding. One of the 5 best relievers in baseball since 2016. At least 5 best closers in baseball. He'll be expensive, but again, if no team was willing to pay him $10 million, he can't go out and ask for a 3-year, $34 million contract, which is what relievers like him have gotten in the past. He can ask for it. He's just not going to get it. The hope here is that maybe Hand will try to look for a 1-year deal to maybe try to re-enter free agency next year, when most free agents are expecting that the market will not be as terrible, for lack of a better word. If there are a group of free agents who say they want to do that, this is the group that the Mariners should absolutely tack on. And Hand makes sense there. He makes sense as a guy you bring in for a year. He's your closer. He does really well. Maybe you look to trade him at the deadline. Maybe you just hold on to him for the entire year and then let him go in free agency, or even try to re-sign him. But Hand's also a guy, he's 30 years old. He's been good for the last 4 years. If he wants a 2-year deal or a 3-year deal, I'm not opposed to this. Obviously, I'm not going to pay him $11 million a year if the market's not demanding that he gets paid $11 million a year. But if you can get him for 3 years, $21 million, hell yeah. Absolutely. That would be amazing for the Mariners to have him at the back of the bullpen. I don't think that's going to happen for a lot of reasons. I don't think Hand's going to take that low of a price cut. I think if he's realizing he's only going to get $7 or $8 million a year, he's just going to do a 1-year deal and try to re-enter free agency next year, which even then, 1 year, $7.5 million for Brad Hand. Absolutely. Mariners should be all over that. So should all 29 other teams. And if that's the case, then it may be a little bit more difficult for the M's to get him. But this is a guy that I would absolutely consider going for. As with everybody else, I think this is a good offseason for the Mariners to really add some pieces that I think will really help them for a year or two before they really start the actual process of getting going in 2022. All right. That was a lot of Mariners talk, but we love it. I'm going to take a quick break, about 5 minutes or so. When I get back, I will be joined by Cameron Van Til to discuss the Seahawks' loss to the Giants, to discuss the rest of the season, what this means for them, what's going on with Russell Wilson, the upcoming return of receiver Josh Gordon, and of course, some playoff implications. Stay tuned.
Take a look under your bed. Find stuff under there? What about jobs? No? Now try your basement. There's a pair of overalls that overall you're not so into anymore. A perfectly good laptop that hasn't sat in your lap in months. And even more stuff, but still no jobs? Well, you really have both. See, stuff is defined as household articles considered as a group. Sometimes this stuff is no longer needed. Wait, no longer needed? That can't be right. Because remember those jobs you were looking for? Those are really needed, and they're the stuff inside your stuff. Even inside that winter coat that moved with you to Phoenix. Our job is to unlock those jobs, and it starts when you donate your stuff to your local Goodwill. Here's how we do it. When you donate to Goodwill, we sell your stuff to provide job training for people right here in your community. So just by teaming up with Goodwill, you help create jobs. And isn't that worth partying with the leftover guitar from your 80s cover band? Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs. Find your nearest donation center at goodwill.org. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Dear John, I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, but you've left me no choice. I'm leaving. Uncontrolled high blood pressure is really serious, and lately you seem to really not care. I've been there for you since day one, and I know you think I'm going to keep ticking. But no, my friend, I can quit whenever I want. Why can't we get back to the good times? When we were more active and ate more healthy foods, and you checked on me every once in a while. Is that too much to ask? I don't want to leave, but unless you stop ignoring me, what else am I supposed to do? Remember, when I quit, you quit. Sincerely, your heart.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you. Doing the minimum to control your high blood pressure isn't doing enough. High blood pressure can lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get your blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late. Find out how at heart.org/blood pressure. Check, change, control. A message from the American Heart Association, the American Stroke Association, and the Ad Council. Range before it's too late.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Jason Derulo. I love that music connects to people all over the country. But unfortunately, so does something else. Childhood hunger. 15 million kids struggle with hunger right here in America. And yet, every year, billions of pounds of surplus food in the U.S. go to waste instead of going to the children in need. Feeding America is working to change this. The Feeding America nationwide network of food banks rescues this surplus of food to help provide meals to families in virtually every community in the United States, including yours. But they just can't do this alone. Join me in the fight against hunger in America. For more information on what you can do to get involved, visit feedingamerica.org. That's feedingamerica.org. Together we can solve hunger. Together, we're Feeding America. A message from Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hey everyone. Let's all stop what we're doing right now and take a moment. That felt good, huh? Just like that, we had a nice special sort of moment together. Of course, they don't all need to be quiet moments to be special. And they could be loud moments, goofy moments, sporty moments, dorky moments. Moments where we talk or walk or just hang out. It doesn't really matter. They all count. Because every time dads like us take a moment like that to spend with our kids, well, it's pretty momentous. Sounds like somebody agrees. So let's take a moment to make a moment. Today, call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Music is a bridge between the material and the spiritual. My name is Harvey Lauer, and I'm 82. As a blind person, you have to be aware that nobody can tell you what you can or can't do. You really have to try things. My folks got me a little radio in 1940, and that was the best Christmas present I ever got. When I was 11 years old is when I started to play music, play the piano, and then the accordion, and then the cello. My wife, who was also blind, was a good cook. When she died, that's when I started Meals on Wheels. America, let's do lunch.
1 in 6 seniors faces the threat of hunger, and millions more live in isolation. Drop off a hot meal and say a quick hello. Volunteer for Meals on Wheels by donating your lunch break at americaletsdolunch.org. This message brought to you by Meals on Wheels America and the Ad Council.
You're listening to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
All right, welcome back. I am so excited to be joined today by Cameron Van Til. Cameron, how is it going?
Good. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. I want to say real quick before we get into our conversations. I did say during that last segment that Blake Snell went to UW. He did not. He committed to UW, and then the Rays drafted him in the first round, and he opted intelligently to sign for millions and millions of dollars as opposed to going to UW. I know he's a huge UW fan, though, and he constantly talks about UW football and tweets about it. So I kind of just forgot that he didn't actually end up going there. But anyway, Cameron, where can the people find you? Where can the people tweet at you? Where can the people who want to read your stuff read your stuff?
Yes. So my Twitter account is at Cameron Van Til. So CAMERON and then VANTIL. And I was with the Everett Herald covering primarily high school sports for them for about 3.5 years until the pandemic hit. Fortunately, I'm now a free agent sports writer at this point now. We unfortunately 4 out of the 7 people on our sports staff got laid off, including myself. And with obviously no high school sports going on in the state of Washington,
Sure.
Unfortunately, that's kind of a brutal blow that a lot of people in the sports writing industry are dealing with right now. But so that's my Twitter handle. To kind of just to kind of stay writing, I made a little sports blog. It's called CameronVanTilSports.com, and I've been doing kind of weekly Seahawks kind of storylines and takeaways after each game. So yeah, that's kind of a little background, and that's where you can read my stuff.
Yeah, well, Cameron, I've been reading your stuff, and it's been fantastic. The Seahawks breakdowns have been excellent. So I really, I'm glad that you're doing that. I'm sorry, unfortunately, that happened to you. I know that it's a story being told by so many in this industry, unfortunately. Through the pandemic, hopefully many of those people, including yourself, will get on their feet eventually. High school sports will return. These companies will need people to write articles for them eventually. So hopefully that will come around soon.
Yeah. Thank you for reading my stuff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So let's get into the Seahawks game. It was terrible. I think that's a pretty easy way to put it. I mentioned in my last episode that I started this radio show before the Bills series, and before the Bills game, and when I was taking notes for that game, I think the headline that I wrote down initially was like, "Does the addition of Carlos Dunlap make this team a Super Bowl contender?" And that was barely a month ago, and it feels like so long ago for that to happen. Obviously, the Bills loss was tough, but the Bills were a good team. The Rams loss was ugly, and then things just really have spiraled since then. Yeah, they got the win over the Eagles, but they didn't even look good there. And then this game against the Giants, this was the segment of the schedule where they had the Eagles, the Giants, the Jets, and Washington. And for those 4 games, it was like, okay, they're going to get 4 wins. They're going to be in a much better spot. They're going to be 11-3, and we're going to feel good going into those games against the Rams and the 49ers. And then to drop this one to a Giants team that was 4-7 heading into the game and didn't even have their starting quarterback. They were starting Colt McCoy, who, I mean, he looked okay, but he's a 34-year-old journeyman backup quarterback who shouldn't be beating really anybody in the NFL, but definitely should not be beating the Seattle Seahawks.
No.
There are so many reasons the Seahawks lost this game, but we got to start with Russ. I think we have to start talking about Russell Wilson. I've defended him on here a handful of times. I've said that a lot of the struggles we've seen over the last couple of weeks have not been his fault, and I stand by that in a lot of ways, but a lot of this game was kind of his fault. He didn't look good at all. It was one of the worst performances we've seen from him. He looked indecisive. His passes were sailing a lot of the time. Can you just talk about what you see or what you think might be going on with Russ at this point?
Yeah, it's crazy because I mean, for the first 5, 6, 7 games of the season, I mean, he was the MVP front runner. Yeah. He was playing out of his mind, and also I think there's definitely kind of there's multiple factors going on as you mentioned. It's not all Russ. The O-line has kind of regressed a little bit. Mm-hmm. I don't think the play calling I don't think they've done a good job adjusting to kind of some of the teams taking away those deep plays, but a lot of it falls on Russ. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
was fantastic, obviously, for the first 5 or 6 games of the season, and just has not been he has not been the same since. I think ever since really that first half of that first game against the Cardinals down in Arizona. They were just firing on all cylinders there. I think they had like 27 points, 370 total yards in that first half. I mean, it was probably the best offensive half of Seahawks football I've probably ever seen. I mean, they were just absolutely on fire. And Russell Wilson and the offense just have not really looked the same ever since. That was the game where he had those 3 interceptions. Prior to that, he, I think, had gone 39 consecutive games without throwing multiple interceptions in a game, which is remarkable. And then he did it 3 times in the next 4 games. He had 3 interceptions against the Cardinals, and then he had 2 apiece against the Bills and the Rams. And so I think you've seen kind of a progression where he was playing out of his mind, and then he started throwing these interceptions. And I think he's kind of got into his head a little bit because it was just so. It was so uncharacteristic, that he was kind of throwing these interceptions and turning the ball over. That I think during the next 2 games, so the Arizona game and then the Philadelphia game, I think he almost got in his head a little bit because those games he didn't turn the ball over, but like he still made some good plays, but like he just seemed very kind of conservative and risk averse, just not kind of his usual self. Like he seemed, it was very kind of almost timid, kind of risk averse, kind of safe way of playing. But then Sunday was like just to the absolute extreme of that. Like I don't think I've ever seen him be so timid and be so hesitant there. I mean, there were times where it looked like he was gonna throw the ball and find it open. And you're kind of sitting there, you're kind of waiting, and then he would take a sack for like a 15-yard loss. And I've never seen him look that timid, that hesitant, and that kind of confused almost, not confident in what he's doing. He's usually so confident in throwing the deep ball or throwing whatever type of pass he's throwing, and he just looked almost lost out there. And it's crazy looking back at like how he looked at the start of the season, especially that Atlanta game where he was so quick, so decisive. Just slinging the ball all over the field, and now he just looks almost lost. And so I think it's kind of been kind of a progression where he started kind of turning the ball over, and I feel like he's almost kind of psyched himself out a little bit to where he doesn't want to turn the ball over so bad that he's almost afraid to kind of make some of those throws now. Yeah,
it's funny because I think you're absolutely right, and I initially pushed back on that idea because Russ is so kind of robotic in the way that he thinks, and he has all these mental health coaches, and he like works so hard to not let things mentally impact him to the point where I was like, nah, it's got to be more than that. And they're like you touched on, and we'll touch on a lot more. There is a little bit more to it than that with the play calling and with the pass protection and things like that. But it was pretty obvious watching this game that there's some confident stuff going on, and I would need to watch the all 22, which I don't know if I'll get to this week, to be honest, but like, unless New York's coverage was like elite, which it has not been this year, or I mean, it would have to have been like Legion of Boom-esque for Russ to have to go to his checkdowns that quickly. And it makes me think that he was lacking confidence. And I believe it was the Rams game, and I'm struggling to remember which exact game it was, but he had that really horrific interception where he was like right at the line to gain.
The Rams game, yeah.
Yeah, and he threw that one across his body. Like, that was probably too confident Russ there. And I'm okay with Russ making mistakes when he's too confident. And I think that we've now seen the counter to that. When he makes mistakes, when he's not confident enough, it's a lot worse. That was a bad throw against the Rams. Don't get me wrong. He should not have made that throw, but sometimes that works, or sometimes the defender will miss it. Like something like that will happen when he's just throwing checkdowns, and the best case scenario is a 4-yard gain. The worst case scenario is that he overthrows the check down, which he did a handful of times. Those usually lead to picks because there's defenders there. I would much rather see arrogant Russ. and I know that some people were like, oh, he needs to not be as confident, or he needs to check it. And like, no, I would rather that than what we've seen lately, because I think you're absolutely right. he's made some mistakes, and some of the interceptions prior to this game that kind of led to this weren't his fault. Some of them were great plays by defenders. Some of them were, one of them bounced off Greg Olsen. Like, some of them aren't his fault, but I think it sure seems like when you kind of look at what we saw from him, again, either the New York Giants played the greatest defense in the secondary that they've ever played in their franchise history, leaving nobody open. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who have never struggled to get open in their careers, all of a sudden couldn't get open against a Giants secondary, or Russ was just panicking. And yeah, his pass protection wasn't great. And that is kind of what I want to talk about next, because I think that was a factor in this game too. Obviously, the biggest thing, Brandon Shell was not participating. Cedric Obuhi was not participating. The two right tackles, they started Chad Wheeler, who hadn't played in the NFL, I believe, in 2 years. He started for the Giants his rookie season out of USC, but there's probably a reason he hasn't played the last few years. And I watched him. He got pushed back a lot, but he didn't give up a ton of sacks. He just, he was part of the reason that Russ was getting flushed out of the pocket rather early, but they were missing him. They had some other injuries throughout the line. It does seem like the pass protection has really faded in the last couple of weeks, and you got to imagine that that's a factor for us at this point.
It has, yeah. I did I dug up some numbers here. Pro Football Focus their pass block grades. So for the first 4 out of the first 5 games, Seattle's pass block grades were above 70. Since then, they have not reached 70 since. And then also those first 8 games, only once were they below 60. Over the past 4 games, they've been below 63 out of the last 4 games.
Yikes.
And so I think that was kind of a story that didn't really get talked about enough. I think was early in the season, like Russell Wilson for like the first time in his career was actually getting like pretty good pass protection. Like I also went back and looked. So prior to this season, 5 out of the last 7 seasons, Seattle ranked 30th or worse in PFF's pass block grading. And obviously, the tape obviously showed that. I mean, Russell spent those years just running for his life. Yeah. And so the first half of the season was really, I felt like the first time that in a long time, maybe ever, that I've ever seen Russell Wilson look like truly confident in that pocket. Like not to the point where, because there were some times in recent years where like the pressure was like so often that even when the pressure wasn't there, he was still kind of like looking around and kind of skittish and like, okay, where am I going to get hit this time kind of thing. And so he just looked so confident and comfortable in the pocket early this season, especially that Atlanta game. He was like 31 to 35, just slinging the ball all over the field, quick, decisive, in rhythm. And right now it's just the complete opposite. He's kind of gotten back to kind of that skittish rust where, again, it's not totally his fault, but the offensive line play has regressed a little bit. Obviously, injuries have played a factor. They had to shuffle things around when Ethan Poshik was out. And then obviously now they're being down to their third string center for most of the game, and then down to their 4th string center for the 4th quarter. And so the offensive line, the pass protection has faded off a little bit, and that's definitely been one of the factors, and I think probably something that was not talked about enough for Russ's success early on, and probably something that isn't being talked about enough for kind of some of the things that are going on right now.
Yeah, and I think it kind of coincides too with a change in how opposing defenses are attacking the Seahawks. Obviously, the Seahawks have built themselves as this team that was kind of going to pound the ball down your throat on the ground and then pass more often on 3rd down, and they got very predictable the last couple of seasons. That's been the criticism of run pass being all they ever did, and that's kind of what bore out the whole let Russ cook movement. And then they did, and I think it really caught teams off guard, because not only were the Seahawks passing way more, which teams knew if they ever did they would be great at because Russell Wilson's exceptional, they were doing it more, and they had a good pass rush, so teams were like, oh, we can't figure out how to get to Russ, and he's got 2 elite receivers, he's got a good group of tight ends they're protecting, like what the hell are we going to do? And that's what happened. And then everything kind of fell apart at once, where the offensive line got a little bit more hurt. The offense itself got a little bit stale. Obviously, Chris Carson being hurt was a factor, because the run game kind of got eliminated to the point where then they had to go to the pass. And then what we saw, Buffalo did this really well, and I think New York did it really well, was kind of these stunt rushes where they delayed a little bit. And there was one in particular. I don't remember who the rusher was, but it was Jordan Simmons playing left guard. Just watch the dude go straight past him and get to Russ easily. And when Russ is hesitating with the football, those gap rushes or those delay rushes are hyper effective because he's not getting rid of the ball quickly. And this is how opposing teams are really good against the Seahawks, is they just throw the ball in like 2.5 seconds or 1.5 seconds because they play this soft zone, which we could talk about later because we're not on the Seahawks defense yet. But with the Seahawks offense, like their passing plays take a while to develop. And then you realize that you can send these different pass rushes, and it was just a recipe for kind of all of these things mixing together. And then on top of all of that, you throw Russ having somewhere in the back of his head that he's going to throw an interception and worrying about that and hesitating just a little bit. Like, we didn't see how many 50-50 balls did we see thrown to DK Metcalf this game? Like, so few. DK Metcalf is a freak. You should be throwing him 50-50 balls unless he's against like Jalen Ramsey. And even then they probably should have thrown him a few 50-50 balls against Jalen Ramsey. And against this defense, absolutely. And they didn't give him a shot to do that. And that's just upsetting. Like, that's something that they needed to get a chance to do. And part of it was Russ having to move, but part of it was him staying there too long. Like you said, he waited in there. The offensive line couldn't hold him for long enough, and he took sacks. And some of them are on him. Like, a lot of them are not on that offensive line too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think defenses have kind of adjusted a little bit. One with the different blitzes, as you mentioned there, but also they've started really trying to take away those deep passes, and you saw it a lot yesterday where they were playing kind of those two high safeties. Minnesota also did a really good job in the first half of that game of really kind of trying to take away the deep ball. And the Seahawks just, a lot of times, they just don't do a good job of making those adjustments in game. Like, it was mind boggling. You're watching this game, and number one, they're playing, two deep safeties for a lot of the time. So those deep passes those long developing routes are not going to be there. And secondly, they were getting pressure on the quarterback. So that makes, as you mentioned, that makes it even tougher. It was just mind boggling why they didn't go to kind of a little bit more of a quick passing game and try and get kind of some of those shorter intermediate stuff. It seems, I mean, I'm not, obviously I don't have a fraction of the football knowledge as Brian Schottenheimer, but from watching the game on my couch, it seemed like that was like a necessary adjustment that they should make. And they just never really seemed to do it. And also, again, part of that is Russell Wilson over his career. Sometimes he's not done a great job sometimes at kind of taking those shorter, 4 or 5 yard gains when he needs to.
Yes. Yeah.
He loves throwing the ball deep. He loves the deep ball, and he's the best deep ball passer in the game. So you got to take those deep shots, but when they're not there, he has to take those shorter kind of underneath throws. And Schottenheimer, quite frankly, just needs to do a better job of getting of putting these receivers in position to make plays. And I just thought that it was very perplexing that there were not more kind of that they didn't go to more of a quick passing game here. And also, like the lack of tight ends this season has been really perplexing. I went into this year thinking like, man, they're gonna have this two-headed monster with Greg Olsen and Will Disley. Olsen's obviously out right now, but I actually picked up Will Disley in 2 of my fantasy drafts at the start of the season in like the 14th round, because I thought, man, this could be like a steal. Like I saw a big season coming for him, but they have not really utilized the tight end like I expected them to. And it seems, especially right now, as teams are trying to take away those deep passes, it seems like the perfect way to really kind of combat that is kind of the tight end, some of those kind of seam routes up the middle. So I think the Seahawks, I think Schottenheimer and Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson really need to kind of do some soul searching, and just in terms of kind of play calling, and really kind of make some adjustments, because other teams, the defenses are making these adjustments on the Seahawks, and they, for whatever reason, a lot of times they just seem to be really slow to make those adjustments themselves. Yeah,
I mean, there's multiple games of tape now that show how to beat the Seattle Seahawks on like tons of it. And obviously not every team has Jalen Ramsey, but now there's been proven ways to do it that don't involve having, one of the best safeties of all time playing on DK Metcalf. And that's what's frustrating to me. And you brought up exactly what I was going to talk about next, which was the tight ends, because they don't have a Doug Baldwin anymore. Tyler Lockett is a slot receiver, but he's more of a deep threat than Baldwin was. He's not that possession guy. Metcalf is not a possession receiver. He's a deep threat. David Moore isn't really a possession receiver. He's more of an end around guy or a deep threat. And so the possession guys, the guys who run those seam routes, like you said, should be your Will Dissleys. Should have been Greg Olsen. They tried it with him. Obviously he got hurt. Jacob Hollister got some attention in this game, but didn't do all that well. Not all his fault necessarily as well. But I mean, the Seahawks went into this season with 5 tight ends on the roster and they're not using any of them. That is very, very baffling to me. They had so many of them. It seemed like it was going to be a huge part of the plan. And then it's just hasn't been at all. It's very strange.
It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, even like 2 games ago, you know, and I mean, Disley had, I think, like 1 target or something. And that was after Olsen got injured. So I was like,
yeah.
Okay, Disley now Disley's at least going to get like, you know, maybe 3 or 4 targets a game. And it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's mind boggling that they have not used the tight ends more. Maybe that's an adjustment that they'll make here, you know, starting next week. But yeah, I certainly did not see this coming. Like I thought Disley was on track to have a pretty big year. And the fact that he's only at, I think he's around like 130, 150 yards this year is
sounds about right. Yeah, agreed. 100%. I was all in on Will. It's his first full healthy year up to this point, and he hasn't been used. But this is a good kind of transition because we were talking about like guys they could use as potential possession receivers, and they're going to get one of those. It looks like they're going to get Josh Gordon, who they re-signed this offseason. He's been reinstated by the NFL for the 8th. I want to say time, lot times. He's going to be eligible to play starting in week 16, so they won't get him for the next couple of weeks. But this is exactly what Josh Gordon was when he was in a Seahawks uniform last year. I think he had like 7 or 8 catches. He didn't play very much, but like all of them went for first downs, but none of them went for more than like, I don't know off the top of my head, but I think like I don't think he had any 20-yard gains. I think he had like a lot of like 10 to 15-yard gains.
He did have that. Remember that? I think it was like a 58-yard.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, that was the only one though, I think. But that was
that was a great catch. I'm excited about this. I think that he does add an element that the team doesn't have. You know, they went into the season with 2 elite receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. They've been as advertised when Russ has been on. They've been extraordinary. David Moore at the beginning of the year looked really good. He's fallen off pretty tremendously. Philip Dorsett didn't play a snap because he was injured. So that third spot has kind of been a stick in the Seahawks side for a while now. And this year it's really kind of bit them, especially if they're not going to use their tight ends for some reason. I mean, I kind of like what we've seen out of like Freddie Swain. He's looked okay, but they really need a reliable pass catcher from, 8 to 10 yards out. And Josh Gordon is that. And he was that last year. He was that with Russell Wilson. They have that relationship already. It's a bummer they don't get him sooner because the book is out on how to beat the Seahawks. And I think that the teams, the Rams and the 49ers, who will have to deal with the Seahawks team, reintroducing Josh Gordon to an offense is going to be a challenge for them. What do you hope to see out of Gordon for those last few games?
Yeah, no, I was actually, I went back for the last 3 games outside of Metcalf and Lockett. Seattle's other receivers have combined for 6 catches, 5 yards, and a touchdown. So 5 yards from your other receivers. I think that was all David Moore. I don't think he got a catch for the last couple of games. So Moore really shined kind of early on in the year. He made some big time catches against the Patriots, I think, and he had a big catch he had a pretty big game against the Dolphins, if I remember correctly.
Sounds right.
But he's really just kind of faded off, and I think that's also been a big part of this too. Is that the Seahawks obviously have 2 elite receivers in DK and in Tyler Lockett, but when those guys are when teams are taking them away with with some of those 2 deep concepts that the Giants used on Sunday, you need other receivers to step up, and so I think this Josh Gordon addition is huge. I think if you had asked me early on in the season, like whether the Seahawks needed Josh Gordon to be like a Super Bowl contender, like I would have been like, no, like they don't need him. Like he obviously has something that makes them better, but this offense was clicking without him. David Moore was playing well. But now you look at it and it's like, man, like they really do need Josh Gordon right now. They need him, and they need him as soon as possible. So I think it'll definitely be a challenge. I mean, he hasn't played in a year. He's coming back for that week 16 game against the Rams. So not exactly the easiest game to kind of to ease him back in. It would have been nice to have him, against the Jets this week, or maybe even against the Jets. It would have been nice to kind of get him some reps before, maybe the biggest game of the year against the Rams. But I definitely think that he could be kind of that boost for this offense. And, he seemed to gel with Russell Wilson last year during the limited time that he played. And he's still obviously a very elite talent. I mean, he hasn't played in a year, but it seems like I know that he's been, working out and training hard, preparing for this moment. And so I expect him to come back and really make a difference for this team.
Yeah, I think especially when you look at him going against the Rams and how the Rams defended the Seahawks last time, that'll be more difficult to do with Josh Gordon in the mix. And I agree with you 100%. I would have thought, he's icing on the cake. He's just an added bonus to have. And now it's like they need him to get to. I mean, they need him. Like they're probably going to make the playoffs without him, but like he's pretty darn important, and that's a pretty stark change from where they were before. And I think the same point that I always make about Josh Gordon, and that I'm not alone in making this point, certainly, but when you look at even just what he was capable of doing last year at his age, and with his lack of having played a lot prior to that, the man is so talented. And it's unfortunate that his career has gone the way that it has, because I think had he been able to play and stay healthy and stay in the league, we'd be talking about a legitimate great. And I'm glad the Seahawks have him. I'm glad he's getting another shot for him, for the team, obviously for Russ, because he likes being with him. And I hope that he shows us some good stuff, because I think it'll be, that Rams game is so crucial. But the team does have 2 games before then. The first one is against the Jets. I didn't think the Seahawks would lose to the Giants, but I got to tell you, I really, really don't think that they're going to lose to the Jets.
Yeah, I have a very hard time seeing that happening.
I think that at this point, it's very legitimate to wonder if the Jets are trying to win football games, particularly against the Raiders. I mean, my goodness, they sent 8. I mean, they ran the play that I always ran in Madden, where you just engage 8 on the final play of the game, which is a terrible strategy. You should not do that. And Henry Ruggs was standing by himself, and Derek Carr, who's playing like a borderline MVP, found him because he's really good and he was wide open. And that was, oh man, the Jets are. Yeah,
the Jets saw their potential number 1 pick flash before their eyes, and they thought, man, we gotta lose this game.
And it's not, this whole thing is not Sam Darnold's fault. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence is probably better, don't get me wrong, but man, I feel bad for Sam Darnold. He was hurt, obviously, and he hasn't been good. Like, I'm not gonna defend his performance, because he's been bad. He was bad in that game. It was his first. He did throw a touchdown. It was his first touchdown in like 7 weeks. It's been a disaster season for the Jets. I don't imagine they'll put up. Pete Carroll and the Seahawks adore playing down to opponents, so I can't predict a blowout, because I've never predicted the Seahawks to win in a blowout. But even in close games, the Jets don't seem like they're going to try very hard to win. So I got to feel pretty confident about this one.
Yeah, definitely. I think after last week's loss, I think the Jets are probably the perfect opponent coming up. I don't think it gets any easier than that in the NFL. Yeah. Obviously, you can't, as we saw last week, you can't take any game for granted.
Right.
But this Jets team, I honestly have not watched. I've hardly watched them at all. But I did watch the end of that game against the. I think it was the Patriots. It was that Monday night game.
Oh yeah.
They made just they made like 2 or 3 just dumb mistakes, like in the last like 5 minutes, and that just kind of encapsulated their whole season. It's like this is why they haven't won a football game yet. Like they just not talented, dumb mistakes. I mean, they're ranked number 31 in offensive DVOA, 27 in defensive DVOA, and 28 in special teams DVOA. So they literally don't do anything well. Like they're bad in like every facet of the game. So
not what you want.
No,
man.
But next week against Washington, that suddenly looks like a pretty tough matchup after what Washington did today to the Steelers.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. You led into it perfectly, Cameron. I was on record as saying that I thought the Steelers were perhaps the worst undefeated team at this stage in the season. And that's not even really a knock on the Steelers. I think they are good, and they were having a very good season. They still are having a very good season. But I'm not stunned that they got clipped by an inferior team like Washington. But yeah, Washington's rolling right now. Like they're a pretty good for their record as well. I think that they're decent. They're kind of finding their way. Obviously, they've had their quarterback issues. They got Alex Smith now. I'm interested in that game. I'm slightly nervous for it. Let's assume the Seahawks take care of the Jets. And I could see a situation where they start looking ahead to the Rams, and you look ahead to Josh Gordon coming back. Maybe they feel a little bit complacent, and Pete's not a coach he's pretty good at trying to discourage that, but they're human and it's hard to not do that. I do think in a way Washington winning this game might keep Seattle's focus a little bit more of like, we don't want to also lose to Washington. They beat the Steelers, who are better than Seattle. So we're like, okay, we have to really kind of tighten up, and Washington has a really good defensive front. And that's what scares me, is they can get to the quarterback really, really easily. And that's going to be the huge story in that game. If they don't protect well, it could be a long night for Russ.
Yeah, definitely. That was, if you had asked me prior to the Seahawks game on Sunday, which of the four teams with losing records that the Seahawks are playing during this 4-game stretch, which of those teams would have the best chance to beat the Seahawks, I would have said Washington without a doubt. Because that game, at least prior to yesterday, that game had kind of the classic feel of a trap game, because the big Rams showdown is the following week. It's a cross-country trip, 10 a.m. start time. Yeah. And obviously that defense is really good. They're ranked 5th in DVOA ratings. They average 3.3 sacks per game, which is 2nd in the NFL. Obviously Chase Young is just a beast. Ryan Kerrigan's really good. They have some other really good defenders too. So if you had asked me prior to Sunday which game the Seahawks are most likely to lose, it would definitely be Washington. But as you mentioned, I think some of the elements of it being kind of the quote unquote trap game, I think those kind of go out the window now. Number one, after the Seahawks lost to the Giants, so that kind of if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will.
Right.
And then secondly, obviously what Washington did today, beating the 11-0 Steelers. So Washington will have the Seahawks full attention now, I think. So that kind of takes that element out of it. And now it just comes down to, can the Seahawks handle that pass rush and that defense? I mean, it's going to be another really tough test. And we've seen what, the Washington is kind of a lot defensively like the Rams, just in terms of like skill level and talent and like that pass rush. And we've seen over the years, obviously, how much that Rams team has been able to kind of disrupt Seattle's offense. And so it's definitely going to be a big test. That's not going to be an easy game for this team.
No, not at all. And hopefully it's a little bit more on their radar now, like you said. But Chase Young is terrifying. And if they watch the tape of the Rams game, which they obviously will, they're going to see a pretty good blueprint for success. And they have the pieces to potentially replicate that. They obviously don't have Jalen Ramsey, but they have a strong secondary. They have a good pass rush. I think the Seahawks need to be healthy for that game. That's a huge kicker. If they're fully healthy and they're super ready, then I think that they have a good chance. Obviously, you always want to hope your team has a good chance against a team with a losing record, but Washington is scary, and that will be a tricky one.
Yeah.
The last thing I kind of wanted to touch on before we take a break and start talking some Zags is just some potential playoff matchups. This was a note that I had before the loss, and now the note is much sadder because it's the potential playoff matchups are much more difficult. I think before it was like, oh, well, we'll host Tampa Bay, and that's not great, but that's okay. And now it's like, are we going to Green Bay? Like that's not fun. Like I don't want to go to Green Bay. I'm curious if you have thoughts on any teams that you would maybe prefer to face or really not want to face that could potentially line up with the Seahawks in a first round game.
Yeah, well, so unfortunately for the Seahawks, I mean, they completely threw out their chance at the number 1 seed. I think they now have like less than 1% chance according to 538. Like they're 2 games behind the Saints right now. The Saints are not going to lose another 2 or 3 games. So that's completely out the window. But yeah, I think that I think, as you mentioned, the number one situation that you want to avoid right now, like the absolute worst case scenario, is playing the Packers in Lambeau Field, because even though obviously like there's not as much of a home field advantage this year with the lack of fans, like playing in Lambeau, like 25, 30 degree weather, potentially snowing. Russell Wilson has struggled a lot for as great as he's been over his career. Like he has really struggled in those bad weather games. He struggled in the rain. He struggled in the snow. He struggled in the cold in Lambeau. That was a game where he threw, I think, 5 interceptions.
5 interceptions. Yeah.
So like that would be the absolute worst case scenario, I think. And if the Seahawks if the Seahawks are able to win the NFC West and get the 3 seed, and the Packers presumably finish as the 2 seed, like there's a very good chance that they could meet, that could be the matchup. Seahawks going to Lambeau Field for the divisional round. Assuming the Seahawks would be able to get past the first round opponent.
Right. Yeah, I got to get there first.
Yeah. So I think that is the worst case scenario. If you're just looking at matchups, like if you were to say that, you were playing on a neutral field, it's really tough. I mean, I think there's 4, obviously, like kind of 4 other legit teams in the NFC. There's the Packers, the Saints, Rams, and the Bucks.
Right.
The Packers obviously have the best offense of those teams. And, the Seahawks defense has made some strides recently against the pass, but, still obviously they've struggled mightily in that regard. So do you want to be playing Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs? I don't know. Probably not. The good thing about the Packers is that they have the worst defense out of those teams. So maybe it's easier for, the Seahawks to put up a lot of points and have one of those, 38-35, last second Russell Wilson.
Sure. Yeah.
Basically just trying to outscore them in a shootout. Whereas like the Saints are top 5 in DVOA on both sides of the ball. They're 5th in offensive DVOA, 2nd in defensive DVOA.
Yeah.
And the Rams are almost the same. The Rams are just a little bit worse in both regards. They're 7th in offensive DVOA and 6th in defensive. And obviously the Rams have given the Seahawks a lot of trouble in recent years.
Much trouble.
Won 5 out of the last 6 games. We've talked about Aaron Donald and how dominant he is in the pass rush. And the Bucks, I think, would be probably maybe the easiest of those, but they're still like pretty highly rated in like advanced analytics. There's number 6 in offensive DVOA, number 3 in defensive. They've had kind of some clunkers lately, but I mean, do you really want to be playing Tom Brady in the playoffs?
Right.
Probably.
Exactly.
So none of those 4 matchups look particularly like good on paper. And I think it's almost a toss up as to what would be the best matchup. But I think as I mentioned, I think the absolute worst situation would be going to play Green Bay at Lambeau Field. I think that is the one situation that you look at it and you're like, man, like I don't think the Seahawks really have a very good shot at winning this game. So
I got a close friend who grew up in Green Bay. He's a diehard Packers fan, lives out here now, and him and I were talking before the Giants game. I think it was before the Giants game, and we were talking about playoff matchups. And he was like, "Yeah, I feel like the Green Bay. I kind of want them to play Seattle. I know some of my friends don't want that matchup." And I was like, "Dude, that's a good one for you guys. Like, I love the Seahawks team, and I think that they have a lot of talent, but their weaknesses going up against Green Bay's strengths." I have a really hard time seeing Seattle pull that one out in Lambeau. If the Seahawks can play that game in the divisional round after winning a playoff game, they're still going to lose it most likely. But at least the season, they kind of salvage the season a little bit. If they're forced to play that game in the first round of the playoffs and they lose, that sucks. But I it's really hard to imagine a scenario where they beat Aaron Rodgers and Green Bay in Lambeau with the way that they've been playing lately. Even at their peak this year, I think the peak Seahawks this season would make it really close. I think there's definitely, like you said, the last second Russell Wilson magic. Yeah, that could definitely happen, but they've got to play at their 98th percentile of what they've done this year. And we haven't seen anywhere close to that in the last couple of weeks, which makes it seem like it could get kind of ugly.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So
the whole NFC playoffs are going to be just fascinating. I think the AFC like is pretty much down to like the Chiefs and Steelers. And honestly, I think the Chiefs are like the definite favorite. Like the Steelers obviously were undefeated going into today, but I mean the Chiefs are clearly the best team in football right now, and definitely in that conference. But the NFC is wide open. I mean, there are probably there are probably 5 different teams that can make it to Super Bowl in the NFC. So it's going to be really fascinating to see what happens.
Yeah, it's going to be a bloodbath a little bit. I think like the Saints, the Rams, and the Packers are all very, very, very strong teams. The Seahawks, when they're on, are right there. The Bucks are right there. It's going to be an intense couple of games in the NFC playoffs. Hopefully Seattle can put on a good show, but it's going to be an uphill battle to be the team that comes out on top for any, not just for Seattle, for any team. It's going to be really hard to come out on top in that area.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break. We tried to keep that as positive as we can, talking about the Seattle Seahawks. It was a little bit difficult. When we come back, though, we're going to be even more into our element as both Gonzaga alumni. We're going to talk about the Zags. Again, this segment would have been more fun had the Zags actually played basketball this weekend, but we're still going to talk about what we've seen, what we're hoping to see, everything else going forward with this team right after this 5-minute break.
Of course my kid's in the right car seat. Well, I think he is.
Yeah, my kid's in a booster seat. He was ready to move up. He is ready, right?
Her car seat looks like the right size.
There are probably rules on when to move up to a booster seat, aren't there?
Rear facing, forward facing. I think I have it right.
Car crashes are a leading killer of children 1 to 13. Are your children in the right car seat for their age and size? Don't think you know. Know you know. Go to safercar.gov/the right seat.
I know my child's in the right car seat, or else I wouldn't get in the driver's seat.
Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You don't usually get a stock tip from a 16-year-old, but I'm here to tell you about a different kind of stock. It's called Better Futures, a stock for social change that's not about making money. Instead, you invest to help students like me go to college. This is beyond a simple donation. It's the opportunity for America to invest in its kids and take an active stake in the future of the country. The return on your investment isn't money. What you get back is knowing you protected our potential. So one day, that potential can grow up to become surgeons and architects, executives and engineers, people who can change the future just by being a part of it. My name is Alicia, and I am your dividend.
Invest in better futures with UNCF. Visit uncf.org/invest. A mind is a terrible thing to waste, but a wonderful thing to invest in. A public service announcement brought to you by UNCF and the Ad Council.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better, and kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor, because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
They'll challenge your authority. They'll try to break your will. They'll push you to the edge of your sanity. Because that's what kids do. But this car is your territory, not theirs. Defend it. Who makes the payments? Who cleans it? Who drives it? You do. That's who. And in here, your word is law. So when you say you won't move until everyone's buckled up, you won't budge an inch. until you hear that click. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. For more information, visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup. Let's go inside the mind of a 10-year-old.
I should have worn those earrings today. I like those earrings. Gabby has those awesome earrings. I need to ask her where she got those, but that's just what she would want me to do. I'll have Michaela ask her for me.
Buckle up, Sarah.
Yeah, but then Michaela will be like, why don't you just ask her yourself? That's just like Michaela.
Sarah, buckle up.
Michaela's such a great name. I wish I was called Michaela. There's like a dozen Sarahs in my class.
Hey, we're not hitting the road until you buckle up, honey.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. I forget sometimes because my brain is like busy, you know? I wonder if there's pizza at school today.
Sometimes it can be tough to get through to your kids, but it's not impossible. Always make sure they're wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Remember, you have the keys, you have the power. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.
You're listening to the Pacific Northwest Sports Radio Show on the Worldwide Sports Radio Network.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back to Cameron as well. Hard to stay positive, like we said, about the Seattle Seahawks. A little bit easier to stay positive about the Zags, at least with what they've been doing on the basketball court. Unfortunately, they have not been on the basketball court as much as they should have been, and have definitely will not be on the basketball court for a while. For those that did not hear, their game against Baylor, which was a number 1 versus number 2 matchup, really exciting Saturday morning game, was canceled just before the game started because of more positive tests on Gonzaga's roster. They had positive tests that almost stopped them in the Fort Myers tip-off against Auburn, and ended up getting to play because the rules allowed them to still play because they didn't have too many positive tests. Unsure if the continued positive tests are results of those or not. I don't like to speculate on who has COVID-19. I don't think that that's a very useful endeavor, but at the end of the day, we know that at least 2 more members of Gonzaga's team, 1 player and 1 non-player personnel, have tested positive. Gonzaga, out of an abundance of caution, according to their statement, have canceled all of their games through December 14th, which means they will not play Tarleton State, which was scheduled for tomorrow. Southern, Northern Arizona University, and Idaho were all scheduled. Their next scheduled game is against Iowa on December 19th. This is a bummer for a lot of reasons. Obviously, the Baylor game is the most notable bummer because it was going to be a really, really fun game of basketball. You know, it's going to be similar to the Gonzaga Duke game from a couple years ago, which was one of the most exciting non-conference, just regular season games in all of college basketball over the last couple of years. And I think that Gonzaga Baylor has the potential to be that kind of game as well. But, you know, you got to stay safe. Unfortunately, when you host a radio show in the middle of a global pandemic, you find yourself talking about the global pandemic a lot. And I have found myself doing that. But wear a mask, be safe, socially distance when you can, as often as you can. Hopefully we can get to the point where when March rolls around, we're not, you know, wringing our hands about whether an NCAA tournament will happen, because that is just not something that anybody wants, is for that tournament to not happen, but particularly Gonzaga fans, because God damn it, that's the first time I've sworn on the show, but it's worth it. This team is really good. They're really, really, really good at basketball. We did see 3 games. Obviously, we saw them play against Kansas and Auburn and West Virginia. They're 3-0. They struggled a little bit with Bob Huggins' squad at West Virginia. Cameron, before we dig into some nitty gritty, what are some impressions of this team that you've seen just so far?
Yeah, I mean, this team, I've been looking forward to this team for probably like a year and a half, since like the summer of 2019, which, you know, I think a lot of Gonzaga fans out there can really relate, and kind of see the progression of kind of some of the recruits, you know, start to commit, or like, you know, Jalen Suggs. I think at that point, like, it looked like, man, the Zags really have a pretty good shot at getting him. And that happened. And then you start kind of piecing things together, like, okay, we'll probably still have Kispert then. Yeah. We'll probably have these other guys. And you start to look at it and you're like, man, like, this team is going to be really, really good. And no disrespect to last year's team, but last year's team was obviously really good. But the crazy thing is that, in my opinion, like, last year's team was probably the least talented Gonzaga team of like the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think so too.
Which is saying, I mean, just to the level this program has been at. But yeah, no, this year's team is the most talented team Gonzaga's ever had. Like the 2017 or the 2016-2017 team that made it to the national championship game. At that point, that was the most talented team. And then 2 years later, in my opinion, the 18-19 team that had Rui Hachimura, Brandon Clark, Zach Marvell, those guys, that team, in my opinion, was actually more talented than the team that made it to the title game. But this year's team is more talented than both of those teams. So they are it's insane how stacked they are. And they would have been, in my opinion, they would have been the most talented team in Gonzaga history without Andrew Nembhard.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, 2 days before the opening game against Kansas, we find out that Andrew Nembhard, who's a transfer from Florida, started all 67 games for the Gators at point guard each of the last 2 years. He transferred to Gonzaga this offseason, fully expecting to sit out because of the transfer rules. But the NCAA has been a lot more lenient because of the pandemic with that stuff. So he applied for a waiver. And lo and behold, 2 days before the season, the Zags got an early Christmas, or I guess Thanksgiving present, finding out that Andrew Nembhard was available to play this year. And so even before that, the Zags had the most talented team in program history, in my opinion. Now you add a guy that's, started all 67 games at Florida at point guard the last 2 years to the equation. And it's a complete embarrassment of riches, like how good this team is. It is absolutely insane. They are stacked all across the board, especially at guard. I mean, it's ridiculous how good this team is.
Yeah. I did a podcast series for my Gonzaga podcast, Score Zag Score, where I did a player preview for each of the guys before the season started. And I had so many challenges, trying to figure out like how much these guys were going to play. Like some of these guys, I'm like, okay, I spent the entire first segment of the show talking about how great they were in high school. They're a top 60 recruit, blah, 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 or they're a grad transfer in Aaron Cook or whatever. And then in the last segment, I'm like, yeah, so they're going to play like 5 to 8 minutes per game. And people listening are like, that's insane. I'm like, it is. But how the heck are you going to find minutes for all these guys? People were like, there's no way that Dom and Julian, which is Dominic Harris and Julian Strother, two of the three members of the Tricky Trio and guys who were both top 60 prospects in the country, like two of the, I think 6 highest rated recruits the program has ever gotten. And I'm like, these guys aren't going to play in year one. Like there's not room for them to play, which is just insane. But this, like you said, this was before Andrew Nembhard was eligible. I think I kind of thought, okay, Dom might get some run as like the kind of microwave, like high level scorer off the bench in like a 5 to 8 minute role is kind of what I thought. Okay, that's probably where he'll be. And now I'm like, no, like he's not in the rotation at all. I mean, you got Suggs, you got Joel Iayi, you got Andrew Nembhard, you got Aaron Cook, and that's not counting Corey Kispert, who can play some 2. That's not counting Martinez Arlauskas, who can, I think, play some 2. There's no room. And yes, the Zags will play 3 guards at a time a lot, 4 if you count Corey, but at least 3 for sure. But it's like you said, it's an embarrassment of riches. This team is so stacked. And I think you got to start, when you're talking about this team, you got to start talking Jalen Suggs first. I think everybody knew he was going to be so good, not just Gonzaga fans. Obviously, he's gotten attention for years. He was a high-level football player in high school, as well as being one of the best basketball players in the country. He was recruited by tons of programs, potentially to play both football and basketball. He was thought to be a candidate to go to the G League. He committed to Gonzaga. He ripped off his shirt to show the Gonzaga logo on ESPN, something that is just not what you would have expected for guys to commit to Gonzaga to look like for most of the school's history. It's just never really been their MO, but it was awesome. And now he's here and arguably already exceeding expectations, which, considering how high some of those expectations were, is absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. I mean, that first game, the first 40 seconds of his college career, he had that alley-oop dunk. And you're like, okay, I guess the Jalen Suggs show has started. But yeah, to put up, that first game was phenomenal against Kansas. You're playing the number 6 team in the country, first ever college game, and he goes out there and all he does is score 24 points and have like 8 assists. Like
casual. Yeah,
it was ridiculous. He is just such an incredible athlete. I mean, some of his plays in transition where he really gets going and he's like weaving in between guys, and his finishing ability at the rim. He's obviously an incredible athlete. He was the Max Preps High School Athlete of the Year, National Athlete of the Year, for his success both in basketball and football. Could have played, as you mentioned, could have played football at like Ohio State, I think, and Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And chose to come to Gonzaga to play basketball, and his athleticism just jumps off the page when you're watching a game. I mean, it's really a pretty remarkable thing to watch.
Yeah, Gonzaga's had some great guards. Don't get me wrong. They've had some guards who are very dissimilar to Suggs in your Dan Dickow, your Kevin Pangos, your Blake Stepp, the more traditional point guards who run a half court offense, more floor generals. They have had some of the more hyper athletic point guards. Jeremy Pargo is obviously the most notable example. He was a bit like that, but I love Jeremy Pargo. Don't get me wrong, but I've watched tons of highlights when he was at Gonzaga. I watched a lot of those games live before I came to GU, and he didn't have the control that Suggs has. Suggs can, like you said, he barrels down the court, and I'm used to seeing a lot of guards do that. And I think of like your Josh Perkinses and your Silas Melsons and Gary Bells, who were good out in the break, but often didn't. Those were situations where the best case scenario was often getting fouled, and Suggs can just finish like easily. He can dunk on people. He can get around them. He can stop his body and move around people effortlessly. And you see guys in the NBA do that sometimes, and so you don't realize how hard it is. And then when you watch like 60 or 70 college basketball games a year, like I do, you realize like this is really, really hard to do. And Suggs is the first guy in a Gonzaga uniform to make it look easy. He's the first guy that makes that look completely effortless. Zach Norvell was pretty good at it, but he a lot of times the ball came off of his hands, or he drew a lot of fouls, but he didn't make it look nearly as easy as Suggs does. It's a pretty incredible thing to watch.
Yeah, definitely. His and some of his finishes at the hoops. I mean, his some of those reverse layups that he had early on, and I think in the Kansas game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his finishing has just been phenomenal. As you mentioned, that body control to be going full speed ahead with so much explosiveness, but also to have the body control to make those acrobatic finishes at the rim, or an explosive jam at the rim.
Yeah,
it's really a crazy thing to watch.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to see him for the rest of the year. I'm bummed that we don't get to see these next 4 games. But I think that they were probably games considering his ankle injury. We don't really have a status update on that. And now, because they're not playing for a couple of weeks, we probably won't get a status update on that. But these next 4 games would have been really fun to see for Gonzaga's like more rotation or role players, like out of rotation guys, which like we talked about at the beginning, they're guys who are on the fringe of their rotation are like top 60 national recruits and high level guys who would be, a guy like Martinez Orlauskas. Like I've seen him draw comparisons to other players who were like deep on Gonzaga's bench 10 years ago. And I'm like, you got to understand that Martinez Orlauskas from a talent perspective would wipe the floor with all of those guys. Like he's so much better than those guys. He's just buried on the bench on this team simply because they just don't have room to play him. So I'm bummed about that, but we got to set our sights on Iowa. And the particular matchup in the Iowa game will be Luka Garza, who's, second runner-up for National Player of the Year last year to Obi Toppin at Dayton. Many people, mostly Iowa alumni and fans, felt that he should have been the Player of the Year. That's neither here or there. He will contend for it again this year. He's looked extraordinary so far. One of the big things we've seen from Gonzaga that was a bit of a red flag, I suppose, is their physicality in the paint. Drew Timme is very talented, but he didn't really show up like in the paint against West Virginia, and Garza is going to be a problem for him. I think Garza is a problem for everybody in the country. So that's not a knock on Timme, but is that something how do you feel that's going to go for Timme, or something that you think is going to be a big problem for the Zags in that game?
Yeah. So I think if you were to get nitpicky, again, this team is just so loaded with talent, but if you were to get nitpicky with, what is a potential weakness on this team?
Mm-hmm.
I think the lack of 3-point shooting outside of Kispert and Ayayi would be one. And then the only other one is the lack of a true rim protector on defense. Like Gonzaga has been really, really blessed with some elite rim protectors in recent years with Shemek Karnowski, Brandon Clark, Zach Collins. I mean, just incredible shot blockers there. And the guys just really do an incredible job of altering the shot and just making everything difficult on opposing defenses. And the Zags don't have that this year. I mean, Timmy, as you mentioned, as great as he is, especially offensively, he's 6'10", and just doesn't have that, the vertical leaping ability of a guy like Brandon Clark or someone like that.
Right.
So I think that that this matchup against Iowa, obviously it's an intriguing matchup because it's, 1 versus 3 at, a top 5 showdown.
Sure.
But it's especially intriguing because I think that, probably the biggest question mark for the Zags is how will they fare when they go up against a really dominant post?
Mm-hmm.
And there's literally no better way to measure yourself than going up against Luka Garza. I mean, he is the gold standard right now. He's 6'11", 265-pound center. Through three games, he's averaging 34 points a game and 9.7 rebounds. So basically averaging a double-double per game.
Yeah.
Which is really tough to do in college basketball. So he is like the ultimate measuring stick for this team. And I think regardless of what happens, even if Garza goes off for like 35 points, this is really good for Gonzaga because now they can see, okay, this is where we're at. This is how we tried to do this. This didn't really work. This is what we're going to have to do next time. Like you would hate to experience something like that for the first time in March and not be able to adjust to it.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really great opportunity for Gonzaga, regardless of how it goes, to try out some things, see what works, see what doesn't work, because you're not going to face a more dominant post in college basketball than Luka Garza. And so I think this is a great opportunity for them. And I'm really curious to see how they try to defend it. I'm not sure exactly what you can do. I'm not sure if it's really possible to shut him down. You're probably just going to have to try and slow him down a bit and keep other guys from going off. But it's going to be really interesting to see kind of what they game plan. They now, I guess, have a lot of time to put in that game plan. They would have been spending, probably a lot of time preparing anyways with these easier opponents coming up. But that's going to be a really, really fascinating matchup.
Yeah, it's funny. You've seen from Gonzaga in years past, I think a lot of times when they face teams that have such an elite player, it's not that they don't guard them necessarily, but they you've seen a game plan of like trying to make the other guys on the team beat you. And it works in the WCC when the other guys on the team are pretty bad. Like I remember Anthony Ireland scored 30 against the Zags. Alec Wintering at UP scored 30 against the Zags. Like they've let guys like that, like ball dominant guards beat them or score a lot against them because they're just like, we can like if Ireland scores 32 and the rest of the team scores 17, we're going to win. So it's not going to be a big deal. That's not going to be the case here. You remember they they tried that against Michigan State a long time ago with Draymond Green, and that did not work at all because Draymond Green absolutely destroyed them. Kawhi Leonard destroyed them against San Diego State. And Luka Garza is not Anthony Ireland. He is Kawhi Leonard. He is, Draymond Green, like in college at least. I don't know that he'll be that level in the NBA necessarily, but it's going to be really hard. It's going to be really, really tough to defend him. And if they just kind of say, well, he's going to score a lot of points, our objective is to not foul him too much so that we can keep our guys in the game. Great, but you got to lock down everybody else. And that's going to be a challenge. It's if you send a bunch of double teams and Garza can pass out and the guys get a bunch of open threes, that's not good either. So you got to kind of pick your poison. And I'm curious how Mark Few and the team will kind of attack that situation because this should be a really close game for them.
Definitely, yeah. And Iowa's a really good offensive team. They have some other really good playmakers too. The good thing for the Zags in that game is that as elite as Iowa is offensively, they're not as good defensively as say like a Baylor.
Right.
That is a team that, Gonzaga, I expect them to put up a lot of points on basically everything they play this year, but they should have an easier job scoring against Iowa than against Baylor, which has a really, really good defense.
I don't know what the over-under is on that game, and I'm not somebody who particularly pays that close of attention. But if you can bet that the teams will combine for more than 180 points, I would probably say that because there's going to be a lot of points in that basketball game.
Yeah, it's going to be up and down, high scoring affair.
Yeah, should be fun. All right, Cameron, last question before I let you go. The Gonzaga Bulldogs win the national championship if you can give me a couple of different things. I think that this team, obviously, it's been elusive that they haven't gotten there yet, but this team is arguably the most talented roster in the nation. Baylor and Iowa potentially are teams that are in contention there, a handful of others. But what is like a key thing or a couple key things that need to happen for this team to win that national championship?
Well, number one, there needs to be an NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. Yes.
honestly, the thing that I'm most afraid of right now with Gonzaga, normally you would be, most scared of, a team like Baylor or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I'm most afraid of right now is, what if there's no NCAA tournament? What if there's, what if some of our guys have positive, all that stuff. So number one, that's obviously the number one key. And number two, I would say, obviously, staying healthy. I mean, we almost saw our season flash for the Jalen injury. That looked really bad. I mean, I don't know what your reaction was when that happened, but I immediately went, the way that he was clutching his foot afterwards and the pain that he was in, like my mind immediately went to Kevin Durant's Achilles, the ruptured Achilles. I thought for sure that he had hurt his Achilles, and I thought that he was going to be out for the year.
Me too.
I was like, for the entire remainder of that half, and then halftime, and then start of the second half, my mind was just like trying to process, like, man, like we just got like our highest ranked recruit in program history. We had these spectacular 2 games, and now it's all over. Like now, thankfully, the Gonzaga still would have had a decent shot of winning the title without him. Andrew again, they're so stacked. Nemhard came in and played a great.
He was phenomenal.
But the road would have obviously been a lot tougher without Suggs. So staying healthy obviously is the second thing. And that obviously goes with the COVID as well, staying healthy. But I mean, purely basketball related, man, I think Gonzaga's going to score their points. Like they're going to put up points on pretty much everyone out there. I think their ability to, I think as we saw, like as we saw in the West Virginia game, I think rebounding and I think defense, like we talked about there, I think that interior defense, like at some point in the tournament, they're going to go up, even if it's not Luka Garza in Iowa, they're going to go up against, maybe a team like West Virginia where they have 2 really good post players. Right. Or, Baylor has, some really good posts. They're more of a guard dominated team, but they have some really physical guys inside as well. Yeah. And so, I think if they can get to a level where they're playing, good interior defense and able to kind of slow some of those guys down, I think basketball wise, I think that's probably the biggest key for them. Another key as well is 3-point shooting outside of Kispert and Ayayi. Kispert's obviously a phenomenal 3-point shooter right now. Ayayi hasn't been great the first 3 games, but he shot like 34% last year. So I'm not really concerned about him. But like outside, I was looking at this outside of Kispert this season, I think the Zags are shooting 25% from 3-point line.
That's bad.
Let me check on this. Oh no. Yeah. So Kispert right now is shooting 45%, 9 of 20 from the 3-point line. The rest of the team is shooting 20%, 7 of 5. So, and again, I expect that number to go up because Joel Ayayi shot 34.5% from the 3-point line last year. I think he's like 2 of 9 or something right now. But at some point, like some of those other guys are going to have to knock down some threes. And the 3-point, the 3 ball is obviously a huge part of the game. It's always been a big part of the game, but it's especially a big part of the game in recent years. That's how teams can pull off upsets, is hitting a lot of threes. And if a team hits 15 threes against us, like we better be like hitting some threes as well. So, I think basketball wise, X's and O's wise, I think having a little bit more reliable 3-point shooting from some of those other players, and then the interior defense, I think those are kind of the two biggest keys for this team.
Yeah, I think the only one that I would add, and those are more or less the exact ones that I would have said, but is just the perimeter defense, something that the Zags have struggled with for as long as Mark Few has been the head coach. It's not something that they've seemed to prioritize. Obviously, you mentioned it. 3-point shooting has become a much bigger part of the college basketball game. It hit the NBA first, and then it's kind of trickled into college basketball where it's become more prevalent. And I think that teams, even not as good teams, if they hit 15 threes against the Zags, that could be a problem. Now against bad teams, like WCC teams, I think the Zags will score 105. And if the team hits 15 threes, it just might be a little closer than you wanted, but the Zags are still going to win. But against teams that have a chance of holding the Zags to even 80, which in the NCAA tournament, there's a handful of teams that will, that could be enough if they hit a bunch of threes. And so that's a little bit concerning. I think Gonzaga has the perimeter defenders to be a good perimeter defensive team. Aaron Cook's phenomenal. He's a great defensive player. I think Jalen Suggs is better than I thought, and he will get better as the year goes on. Nembhard, I'd like to see a little bit more, but I think he's good too. Joel and Corey are veteran guys who've proven to be good at it. Part of it is just schematic. The way that they defend high pick and rolls often leads guys to be open from three. Hopefully they've abandoned a lot of zone looks. I still have nightmares about the Syracuse game in 2010 when Andy Routens and Wesley Johnson just bombed threes against a soft 2-3 zone and absolutely crushed the Zags. But they seem to have abandoned that for the most part, so that's good. But yeah, I think if they can do a good enough job against the three, and teams will get hot eventually, they always do, but if they can do a pretty good job against the perimeter, Timmy can show a little bit more. We haven't really talked about Umar Ballo yet. He is expected to be a shot blocker eventually. He's not there yet. He's actually impressed me in the West Virginia game. I liked what we saw out of him. Knocked down his free throws, which was kind of not something I thought we'd see out of him. But I don't envision him being like a force around the rim yet. I do think he will be eventually. I think he has all of the tools, the physicality, the size. And even some of his footwork has looked pretty good for a kid who's so young. He's so young. But it's really hard to be a freshman shot blocker in the NCAA. It's really hard. You get called for a lot of fouls. The pace of the game is different. For him to look even adequate defensively against West Virginia gives me some hope that he might be a guy who can impact some shots in the NCAA tournament. But he's also a guy who I think if he plays 12 minutes will A, be very tired because he looks fatigued early, and B, will probably have committed all 5 of his fouls by then. So I'm not sure he can be relied upon too much in those situations. But yeah, I think you hit a lot of those right on the head with what this team needs to do to get to that potential, finally break that barrier for this program.
Yeah. Well, let's hope first and foremost there's a tournament, and then hopefully as Gonzaga alums we get to see the Zags cut down the net.
Absolutely, Cameron. Thank you so much, man, for coming on. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Monday night to talk Seahawks and Zags. When we first agreed to chat, I think we were hoping that we would A, be talking about a Seahawks win, and B, be talking about at least a game between the Zags and Baylor. I was okay with the loss. I mean, it would have hurt, but it would have given us a lot to talk about, and we still made it work with a very lengthy conversation, even after a Seahawks loss and no Gonzaga game. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And just as a reminder for everybody, you can find Cameron at Cameron Van Til, and you can find his website. That's on Twitter. You can find his site on CameronVanTilSports.com. Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to just had a little bit more planned to talk about with Pac-12 football in particular, but we went a little bit long there, and that's okay because Pac-12 football is a bit of a dumpster fire. And I don't know that you guys would have wanted to hear 20 minutes about how much of a dumpster fire it truly was. Oregon State, Washington State all lost this past week. UW fell to a not very good Stanford team. They just got off to a really, really slow start, let Stanford score right away. Big 11-play drive, marched down the field, scored with ease, put UW behind the sticks early, and things just got ugly. They got ugly right away for this team. They ended up crawling back and made it look a little bit better, but it was rough. And this completely dashed their hopes of the Pac-12 North. Dashed their hopes of any kind of playoff picture. They're still probably going to win the Pac-12 North because the Oregon Ducks lost as well. The Ducks now have 2 losses. We're talking about a team that was expected to be a potential candidate for the college football playoff, that was a virtual shoo-in to be playing USC in the Pac-12 championship game. Now Oregon is out of that. They lost to Cal. Their defense has just been atrocious all year. I mean, it's been so bad. And with a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau off the edge, like, they have so much talent on this team, and it's just been really, really ugly. And now I think, you're going to have UW probably limp into a Pac-12 North championship. They're going to play USC, assuming that game happens. USC virtually locked it. I think they did lock it in, assuming the schedule doesn't change, because USC is 4-0 at this point. Colorado's 3-0. But since those two teams aren't playing each other, there's not really any way to potentially get a different Pac-12 South champion. USC pummeled Washington State, beat them real badly, scored 4 touchdowns in the first quarter, all by Amon-Ra St. Brown. He tied a USC receiving record with 4 touchdowns in a game. He did it in a quarter, which is obscene. Washington State was going up with 2 members of their secondary were not playing, which was part of the reason that USC was able to move the ball so efficiently. But just a rough year, a rough week for all of the Pacific Northwest teams in the Pac-12, and kind of just a rough year for the Pac-12 in general. I had far more thoughts planned on how the decision-making to postpone the season or cancel the season initially, then decide to bring it back, then decide to set up a schedule where you have no ability to reschedule games, no bye weeks built in, none of that, really set themselves up for failure. Obviously, they were operating in states that have more stringent COVID restrictions than most of the other states in like the SEC or ACC or other conferences like that. But the Pac-12 should have been more prepared for that. And the fact that they weren't really set themselves up for a wonky season. And that's what you got, is a super wonky season. You got nobody being very good. USC will limp out on top. They're not remotely a candidate for the college football playoffs in my mind. And it's kind of just going to end with a whimper. I think Oregon and Washington will play each other this week in a game that would have had a lot more intrigue had either of those teams won this last week. But the fact that neither of them did just kind of makes it not a particularly interesting game. So it's a bummer note to end on. But like I said at the start of the show, it was a bummer week for sports in the Pacific Northwest. Hopefully next week will be better. We'll have more fun things to talk about. I'm really already excited about the guests we have lined up for next week. It should be a really good one. But thank you all for listening. Thanks again to Cameron Van Til for coming on to the show. I really appreciate his insight on both the Seahawks and the Zags. And I'm looking forward to talking to all of you again in 1 week.